Welcome to Spicy Lady Sigma. People are not as open as they appear. They are simply selective about what they reveal. There is a type of woman who does not fit into the usual social patterns people expect. She is not loud about her intentions. She does not chase approval, and she rarely explains herself to be understood. Instead, she moves with a quiet awareness of people, situations, and energy shifts that most overlook. What makes her hard to read is not mystery for a performance, but a deep habit of observation before participation. This topic explores the darker psychological side of that behavior, not in a negative sense, but in the way human nature becomes sharper when emotions are controlled and attention is placed on awareness rather than reaction. These habits are not about being cruel or manipulative. They are about emotional discipline, internal boundaries, and the ability to step back when others are emotionally pulled forward. Many people misinterpret this kind of woman because she does not over-explain her decisions. She prefers to let time reveal what words would only complicate. In a world where everyone is expected to constantly express, she often chooses restraint, and that restraint creates misunderstanding. As you go deeper into these 10 habits, you may start to recognize patterns in people you thought you already understood. By the time you reach number 10, it may challenge the way you interpret silence, distance, and emotional control in ways you did not expect. Let's get started. Spicy Lady Sigma. Number 1. She does not move on in the traditional sense. She simply reclassifies people as irrelevant and stops allocating internal space to them. She does not move on in the way most people expect, where there is drama, emotional talks, or visible signs of struggle. Instead, something quieter happens inside her mind. She simply changes the position that person holds in her internal world. They are no longer an emotional priority, no longer a mental focus, and slowly not even a passing thought that carries weight. It is not about hatred or revenge. It is about mental reorganization. To understand this, imagine a phone filled with apps. At first, some apps are on the home screen because they are used often. But over time, if they are no longer useful, they are not deleted with emotion. They are simply moved into a folder and eventually forgotten. Clears throat. That is how her mind works with people who lose meaning or respect in her life. For example, if someone breaks trust, she does not keep replaying the situation endlessly or waiting for closure conversations that may never feel satisfying. Instead, she observes the pattern, accepts what it reveals, and quietly reduces their importance in her emotional system. She may still be polite. She may still interact if needed, but the emotional attachment is already gone. What makes this so powerful and also misunderstood is that there is no visible breakdown, no long explanations, no repeated arguments, just distance that feels natural and final. People often think they still have the same place in her life because she does not create dramatic endings. But internally, the shift has already happened long before they notice it. In real life, this can be seen when someone keeps texting or trying to reconnect while she responds with calm neutrality. There is no anger, no excitement, just emotional absence. It feels confusing to others because they expect closure that matches their level of emotional intensity. This is not coldness. It is mental efficiency combined with emotional self-protection. She understands that holding on to people who have already lost their place only creates internal noise. So she clears space quietly and moves forward without announcing it. Number 2, she rarely expresses neediness, which makes others underestimate how deeply she actually feels things. Not everything that is felt is shown, and not everything that is shown is truly felt. She rarely expresses neediness, and because of that, people often misunderstand her emotional depth. On the surface, she appears steady, composed, and self-contained. She does not constantly seek reassurance. She does not repeatedly ask for attention, and she does not turn every emotion into a public display. But what most people fail to realize is that silence is not absence of feeling. In her case, it is control over expression. She feels things deeply, sometimes even more intensely than those who express everything out loud. The difference is that she processes emotion internally instead of releasing it outwardly. This creates a false impression that she is unaffected or detached when in reality, she is simply private with her emotional world. For example, if she cares about someone and that person becomes distant, she will not chase them with repeated messages or emotional questions. Instead, she observes, reflects, and adjusts her expectations quietly. The emotions are still there, but they are contained, not performed. To others, this can look like indifference, but internally, it is often a complex mix of understanding, acceptance, and restraint. This is where many people misjudge her. They assume that because she is not asking for more, she does not want more. But her emotional logic works differently. She believes that constant neediness can distort relationships and weaken self-respect. So she chooses to carry her feelings with dignity rather than dependence. In real situations, this shows up when she is going through something difficult, yet still manages to appear composed in public. People around her might say she is fine because she is not breaking down, but they do not see the private moments where she processes everything in silence. The truth is her emotional depth is not missing. It is simply not outsourced. And because she does not constantly reveal it, people often underestimate how much she actually feels, cares, and remembers. Number 3, she does not argue to win. She disengages when she realizes the other person is arguing to feel powerful. Not every battle is worth your voice, and not every loud person is trying to understand you. She does not argue to win. That is not her goal. In fact, the moment she senses that a conversation is no longer about understanding, but about dominance, something changes in her behavior. She quietly steps back, not because she has nothing to say, but because she has already understood what kind of exchange it has become. Most people argue to prove a point, to feel right, or to protect their pride. But she pays attention to something deeper. She watches the tone, the repetition, and the emotional intent behind the words. If she realizes that the other person is not listening, but simply trying to overpower the conversation, she stops investing her energy there. For example, imagine a situation where two people are discussing a mistake. One person is open to understanding what went wrong. The other keeps interrupting, raising their voice, and twisting the discussion into blame. Instead of escalating it, she simply goes quiet. Not because she lost, but because she refuses to turn the conversation into a performance of ego. This can confuse people. They may expect her to defend herself endlessly or match their intensity. But she understands something most people overlook. Winning an argument with someone who is emotionally committed to misunderstanding you does not create clarity. It only drains energy. So she disengages. Sometimes that means she stops replying. Sometimes it means she changes the subject. And sometimes it is just silence that speaks louder than continued explanation. To her, peace is more valuable than proving a point to someone who has already decided not to listen. This is where her strength is often misunderstood. People assume silence means defeat, but in reality it is a choice. It is her way of refusing to participate in conversations that are built on ego instead of truth. And in doing so, she protects her energy, her clarity, and her emotional balance without needing to announce it to anyone. Number 4, she tolerates people longer than they realize. But once the internal threshold is crossed, there is no return path. She tolerates people longer than they realize. On the surface, it may look like she is patient, easygoing, or unaffected by small issues. She does not react to every mistake. She does not confront every discomfort, and she does not announce every boundary. Because of this, people often assume she is always available, always understanding, and always willing to adjust. But what they do not see is that she is quietly taking mental notes. Not in a petty way, but in a deeply observant way. She is understanding patterns, not just incidents. One mistake does not change her view, but repeated behavior slowly builds a picture in her mind. She gives space for growth, space for correction, and space for awareness. That is her form of patience. For example, someone might repeatedly interrupt her, dismiss her thoughts, or take her effort for granted. She may not react immediately. She may even continue interacting normally, laughing, responding, and staying present. From the outside, it looks like nothing is wrong. But internally, she is observing consistency. She is measuring respect, not words. Then something subtle happens. A limit is crossed, not in a dramatic moment, but in a quiet realization. It could be the same disrespect repeated once too often, or a final situation where she clearly sees intent rather than accident. At that point, her tolerance does not break loudly. It ends silently. What makes this shift so striking is that there is no warning sign in the way people expect, no final argument, no emotional announcement, just a shift in how much access someone has to her time, attention, and emotional space. And once that internal threshold is crossed, there is no return to the previous version of the relationship. Not because she is cruel, but because she understands that repeated behavior is rarely accidental. It is a pattern. So she does not remove people in anger. She simply stops restoring access that was lost through repeated disregard. And to others it often feels sudden, but in her mind it was a slow and careful conclusion. Number 5, she allows people to assume they have influence over her while internally she has already limited their impact. Not everything that looks like access is actually influence, and not every reaction means control. She allows people to assume they have influence over her. But internally, she has already set quiet limits on how much they can actually affect her life, emotions, and decisions. On the surface, she may respond normally, laugh at the right moments, agree in conversations, and even show warmth. Because of that, people often believe they still have strong emotional access to her. But what they do not realize is that she has already measured their impact and adjusted their place in her inner world. She understands something many people miss. Not everyone deserves equal emotional weight. So instead of confronting or explaining this, she quietly shifts people into different levels of importance. Some remain close, some become distant, and some are simply there out of politeness, not emotional connection. For example, someone might think their opinion strongly affects her decisions because she still listens respectfully. They might believe they can easily trigger her emotions or change her mood. But internally, she has already reduced their influence. Their words no longer shape her choices the way they assume they do. She hears them, but she does not absorb everything. This creates a strange gap between perception and reality. To others, she appears engaged and responsive, but inside, she is emotionally selective. She decides what matters and what does not, even while maintaining normal interactions. That is why people often misread her reactions as agreement or attachment. In truth, she is observant, not absorbent. She takes in information, but she does not let everything settle into her emotional core. This allows her to stay calm even in situations where others might feel easily swayed or overwhelmed. The most interesting part is that she does not need to announce this boundary. There are no explanations or warnings. People continue believing they have influence because she does not challenge that belief openly. But over time, they realize that their impact on her decisions, emotions, or direction is far smaller than they assumed. She does not cut people off loudly. She simply reduces their emotional reach quietly while life continues as normal on the outside. Number 6, she gives people enough freedom to reveal their true selves, then quietly adjusts her behavior based on what appears. She gives people enough freedom to reveal their true selves, and that is where her real strength lies. She does not rush to judge. She does not force conclusions early, and she does not try to control how others behave. Instead, she observes. She creates space for people to speak, act, and respond naturally without pressure or performance. And in that space, patterns begin to appear. Most people try to understand others through words alone. She goes deeper. She pays attention to consistency between words and actions, especially when no one is watching. That is where truth often shows itself. She understands that people can present a version of themselves in the beginning, but time always exposes what is real. For example, someone might come into her life appearing kind, supportive, and attentive. At first, everything feels easy and comfortable. But over time, small situations begin to reveal more. How they act when they are frustrated, how they treat people they do not need anything from, how they respond when things do not go their way. She notices all of it quietly without interrupting their flow. She does not confront every inconsistency. She does not announce every observation. Instead, she simply adjusts. If someone shows reliability, she allows them closer access. If someone shows inconsistency, she becomes more reserved. If someone shows disregard, she reduces emotional availability without explanation. What makes this so powerful is that the other person often does not realize anything has changed. They continue interacting the same way, believing everything is normal. But her responses slowly shift. Less emotional investment, less expectation, more distance in energy. Even if conversations still continue, this is not punishment, it is adaptation. She is constantly aligning her behavior with reality instead of assumption. And because she allows people the freedom to be themselves without interference, what she receives in return is often the most honest version of them. In the end, she does not need to expose people or argue about who they are. She simply watches, understands, and adjusts quietly based on what they consistently show over time. Number 7. She prefers leaving conversations unresolved if they are draining, because closure is not always worth her energy. She does not believe every conversation needs to end with full closure. If a discussion becomes emotionally draining, repetitive, or mentally exhausting, she knows when to step away without finishing every point. To her, peace of mind is more valuable than proving every detail or forcing every disagreement into resolution. In daily life, many people feel uncomfortable when things are left unfinished. They want answers, final words, clear endings, and mutual understanding. But she sees things differently. She understands that not every person is ready to listen, and not every situation leads to meaningful resolution. Sometimes continuing the conversation only deepens frustration rather than bringing clarity. For example, imagine a situation where two people are arguing about something small like a misunderstanding in tone or intention. One person keeps pushing to explain and correct everything while the other keeps twisting the conversation into blame or ego. Most people would try harder, talk longer, and push for closure. She does not. Once she notices the conversation is no longer productive, she quietly steps out of it mentally. Even if she is still physically present, this does not mean she is careless or avoids responsibility. It means she understands the difference between resolution and exhaustion. If a conversation is going in circles, she knows that adding more words will not create understanding. Instead, it will only drain energy and increase emotional tension. So, she chooses silence at the right moment. Sometimes she changes the subject, sometimes she responds minimally, and sometimes she simply stops engaging. To others, it may feel like things are left incomplete, but to her, not everything needs completion to be understood. The interesting part is that she carries no pressure to fix everything immediately. She trusts that clarity comes with time, not forced conversations, and if someone truly wants understanding, they will return with a calmer mindset. In the end, she values her mental space more than perfect endings. She knows that some conversations are not meant to be solved in the moment. They are simply meant to be released, so she can move forward without carrying unnecessary emotional weight. Number 8. She can switch from warmth to complete neutrality instantly when respect is broken with no gradual transition. She has a clear internal line when it comes to respect. And once that line is crossed, her energy changes immediately. There is no slow shift, no long emotional buildup, and no warning signs that drag on. One moment she can be warm, engaging and open in conversation, and the next moment she becomes calm, distant, and completely neutral. This is not about mood swings or emotional instability. It is about clarity. She understands very quickly when someone is no longer interacting with her from a place of respect. It could be a rude tone, a dismissive comment, repeated interruption, or even subtle disrespect hidden in jokes. While many people might overlook it or laugh it off, she notices it instantly. For example, imagine she is speaking in a normal conversation and sharing her thoughts. If the other person suddenly starts talking over her, mocking her point, or making her feel small in front of others, something inside her shifts. She does not argue louder or try to compete for attention. Instead, her energy drops to neutral. She responds less, speaks less, and emotionally steps back without creating a scene. What makes this change so striking is the speed. There is no emotional warning phase where she gets visibly upset or starts complaining. She simply stops giving the same warmth she was giving a moment before to the other person. It can feel like hitting an invisible wall. This neutrality is not anger. It is absence of emotional investment. She is still present physically, still listening if necessary, still polite when required. But the emotional connection is no longer active. The access has changed. Most people expect reactions to be loud or gradual, but her response is different. It is immediate adjustment based on behavior. She does not argue to restore respect. She removes emotional engagement when respect is removed. And once she reaches that neutral state, it is not easily reversed. She does not return to the same level of warmth simply because the other person changes tone later. For her, respect is not something that switches on and off. It is either consistently present or quietly withdrawn. Number 9. She withdraws information instead of arguing because silence gives her more control than explanation ever could. She does not rush to explain herself every time there is misunderstanding or tension. When a situation starts turning into an argument, she often does something that surprises people. She simply stops giving more information, not because she has nothing to say, but because she understands that not every conversation deserves full access to her thoughts. In everyday life, most people feel the need to defend themselves. They want to clarify every detail, correct every wrong assumption, and make sure they are fully understood. But she has learned that too much explanation can sometimes weaken your position instead of strengthening it. The more you talk in the wrong environment, the more your words can be twisted, misinterpreted, or used against you. For example, imagine someone is trying to argue with her over a misunderstanding. They are not listening. They are reacting. They interrupt. They assume. And they push their own version of the story. Instead of continuing to explain herself repeatedly, she quietly reduces what she shares. She answers only what is necessary, nothing extra. The conversation slowly loses fuel because she is no longer feeding it with emotional energy or extra details. This is not avoidance out of fear. It is awareness. She understands that silence can sometimes be more powerful than correction. When she stops over-explaining, she stops giving others material to distort. She protects her peace by choosing what to reveal and what to keep to herself. What makes this so effective is that it shifts control of the conversation. While others may expect her to keep defending her position, she steps back emotionally and observes instead. The pressure leaves her and it often transfers to the other person who is now left without constant responses to react to. In the end, she is not trying to win arguments. She is trying to preserve clarity and emotional balance. And in situations where explanation leads only to exhaustion, she chooses silence as a form of strength, not weakness. Number 10. She rarely corrects misunderstandings about her character because being misread keeps her strategically invisible. She does not feel the need to correct every misunderstanding people have about her character. When people form the wrong impression, she often lets it stay that way. Not because she agrees with it and not because she does not care, but because she understands something most people overlook. Being fully understood by everyone is not always an advantage. In everyday life, people try hard to control how they are seen. They explain themselves, defend their actions, and correct every rumor or assumption. But she notices that the more someone tries to fix every perception, the more attention they draw to themselves. Every correction becomes another layer of exposure. Every explanation gives people more information to analyze and judge. For example, if someone misunderstands her as distant or overly private, she does not rush to prove otherwise. She does not go around acting overly friendly just to correct the image. Instead, she continues living normally. Those who take time to know her will naturally understand her better, while those who do not may continue with their assumptions. She is not interested in forcing clarity where there is no real effort to understand. This creates a kind of quiet protection. Misunderstanding becomes a form of distance between her and unnecessary attention. People who do not truly know her form their own versions of her while she remains unaffected in her real life. It keeps her out of unnecessary expectations and emotional demands that often come from being fully visible to everyone. At the same time, she is very aware of who she allows closer. The people who matter to her eventually see her clearly through experience, not explanation. She does not perform different versions of herself for approval or correction. She simply remains consistent and lets time reveal what is real. In a way, being misread gives her space. It reduces pressure, limits interference, and allows her to move without constant scrutiny. And for her, that quiet invisibility is sometimes more valuable than being perfectly understood by people who were never truly paying attention in the first place. In final words, the deepest understanding of people often comes from what they do not say, not what they do. As we come to the end of this topic, one thing becomes clear. What people often call mystery, distance, or emotional control is usually a result of observation, experience, and learning how to protect personal energy in everyday life. It is not about being superior or distant from others. It is about knowing when to engage and when to step back. Across these 10 habits, a pattern appears. She pays attention more than she reacts. She listens more than she explains, and she often chooses silence when speaking would only create confusion or drain her energy. To some people, this is misunderstood as coldness. To others, it may look like detachment, but in reality, it is often just a different way of handling emotional situations. Many people move through life reacting quickly, trying to fix misunderstandings immediately or proving themselves in every situation. This approach is different. It is slower, more selective, and based on understanding rather than impulse. Not every moment requires a reaction, and not every situation deserves full emotional investment. If you followed every point carefully, you may start to notice similar behavior patterns in real-life conversations, relationships, and even within yourself. The final habit is not just another idea. It ties everything together by showing how silence, awareness, and emotional control can completely change how a person experiences the world. By the time you reach number 10, it is no longer just about habits. It becomes about how you read people, how you respond to energy, and how much of your own emotional space you choose to protect in everyday life. Thank you for watching, and God bless.